joined the Arthur Kornberg group when they were the microbiology faculty. I was never faculty, I was senior staff. And when Stanford in 1959, 1958 asked Kornberg to come to Stanford University Medical School and set up the biochemistry department, which they did not have at that time, but which they needed in order to become an accredited medical school. He accepted on the condition that he could move his entire department. And Stanford agreed, and one by one, those of us who were support staff got told whether we were coming to Palo Alto, Stanford, or not. And I was the last one told, and I came. And I became director of laboratories of biochemistry department at Stanford Medical School in '59. Left it in '67 to become assistant to the chairman of biological sciences, whose chairman was Donald Kennedy, who just passed away. And I became acquainted with Paul Ehrlich, the population biologist. So I really got into biology and biochemistry first, and then biology. And if I needed more money, I would work spare time or overtime as a clinical chemist at Stanford University Hospital on evenings and weekends. Well, when Hogness hired me as his research assistant, I reported to work at the microbiology department at Washington University Medical School on Euclid in St. Louis, Missouri. And that's really where the initial work on an enzyme called DNA polymerase began. And it became the work where Ernie Sim, a black guy that I became very well acquainted with, who was a high school graduate but a brilliant biochemist with no degrees, and later was appointed as a faculty lecturer at St. Louis University, St. Louis, Missouri. He and I became good friends, and I learned a lot from Ernie. But he was Kornberg's primary technician, as I was Hogness's primary technician. The other person that was a member of that faculty was Paul Berg, who was dealing with ribonucleic acid, an analog of desoxyribonucleic acid, which we were dealing with. Now, when Stanford asked Kornberg to come to Stanford and set up the biochemistry department here, they needed that department in order to become accredited as a medical school, and Paul Berg came, and so did Dave Hogness, and I came along with the group. I became director of labs and worked with a fellow named Peter Hofer, and we're the ones who laid out the floor plan, laid out the labs. The bias by architects and engineers was to design chemistry labs that looked like Louis Pasteur labs, with a flat countertop with a lot of water and gas and vacuum outlets and a trough for running water. I had to really argue with them to say we don't need that. We just want a flat outlet, but at the end is a sink with where you have vacuum water and all that, the utilities. But we want a lot of electrical, because one of the best courses I ever took at Purdue University was an electronics instrumentation course, and I would be the one resource the faculty and graduate students would use in helping electrical engineers, Beckman Instruments, who was and a few other electronic corporations, which were here in Silicon Valley. We designed instrumentation that was the first of its kind, and and we worked in miniaturization because I, as a former medical technician type in a military hospital, knew that sometimes the sample you got from a patient was only 1 millimeter, one, uh, and chemistry labs tests were designed for 10 millimeters. So we made everything into a microchemistry process. Um, and we also automated it. And so the original designs for some of these tests were really Rube Goldberg's because they were devices connected to each other. And later on, Beckman Instruments and Hewlett Packard put them all in one box. And we worked with engineers from Fisher Scientific. I reminded Stanford that a lot of these instruments would be very valuable. Well, I didn't remind him. I wrote him a note to the business office and said the university needs a policy about patents because we're coming across a lot of innovative issues. We're designing the instrumentation that deals with them, and that instrumentation needs to be patented in the name of Stanford University so that you get the payoffs, the profits from the manufacture and sale of those instruments. Um, Hewlett Packard, Beckman Instruments, and a couple others agreed to all that. So that, at first, Dr. Kornberg, who was the department head, didn't want to do that because it took a lot of administration, but I dealt with the administration. Later on, he admitted to me that he was very happy because the 15% that we got over time became a hell of a lot of money. So biochemistry department became one of the wealthiest departments at Stanford Medical School, and funded microbiology and a few other departments that had a tough time getting grants and stuff. A lot of people don't realize this, but medical school faculty departments are almost self-sustaining, and they're supported by federal grants and contracts with the private sector dealing with specific problems that require basic research. Basic research requires a knowledge of instrumentation and processing, and the most important part of basic research is a system of recording information and training technicians who report what actually happened rather than what they wanted to happen. Because what they actually happened is the natural process that is stable. What they wanted to happen would vary from technician to technician. So we began to get ahead of everybody when it came to characterization of DNA and RNA and the enzymes that worked with it. It wasn't too long when people from Max Planck Institute and the Royal Academy of Sciences and the American Association for Advancement of Science would come to our lab to learn our techniques and processes. And I was one of their instructors. Now, most of our work had to do with DNA, desoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA, ribonucleic acid. These are macromolecules which geneticists later demonstrated were where the genes reside in the nucleus of any cell. And the genes really can be thought of as the containers of these large macromolecules which exhibited chemical memories, chemical information. Now, the suffix ase, A-S-E, means it's an enzyme. And an enzyme is a catalyst which lowers the energy needed to change a molecule. Like when you eat carbohydrates, bread, or anything that has that those long molecules of carbohydrates get reduced by enzymes to glucose, sucrose, galactose, which are molecules that have 6 carbon atoms in a circle. And then there are enzymes which break that open. And eventually, if you follow all of that, there's a series of enzymes known to biochemists as Krebs Cycle. And what Krebs Cycle family of enzymes do is to take glucose and reduce it to CO2 and water. And they release a large amount of energy which you experience as heat. It's what keeps your body temperature at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. So you don't know how much biochemistry you as an individual are an example of unless you study biochemistry. But don't be afraid of it, because everything, the lizards, the snakes, everything that is alive deals with digestive systems which reduce food to water and energy, some sort of carbohydrate molecule, water and energy. And the plants take CO2 and combine it with water and make carbohydrates. So it's a cycle. It's a natural cycle that exists in everywhere. Anyway, I met Verna Ruth Palmisano as a counselor. We were counselors. We met in a counseling conference where we were being oriented. And after 2 years of dating and relationship, and my going down to New Orleans where her family lived, we got married. But that was a problem because the parishes of New Orleans would not issue a marriage license to anyone who could not prove their birth certificate said. In the Palmisano family, my brother Ralph was the one who came down to New Orleans to be my best man. We found we couldn't get a marriage license in the New Orleans parish because my birth certificate didn't say I was a Anglo-Saxon heritage. In other words, a white person. So we had to go to a different parish where they were more understanding about those issues. And I forget which parish we went to, but we got a marriage license, got married down there. And then we left Indiana University and went to Purdue, where I was in biological sciences, studying my professor was Merwin Moskowitz, who was studying the hemolytic Streptococcus type A. And as a chemist who had self-studied on his own time the biochemistry that was available at the time, I grew that bacterium and extracted a protein that we later demonstrated to be the hemolytic factor that would cause disease and destroy red cells. And Dr. Moskowitz published that data before I could use it for my master's thesis or Ph.D. thesis. And he did that without consulting me. But then later on I understood why he did that. He was under a lot of stress on this publisher parish environment of that time. And that was a really important revelation. So he went ahead and published it and took credit for it. My name does not show up on any of the reprints of the work that I did. He asked me to stay for 7 years. I would get a Ph.D. And I said to him, I said, you know, Merwin, I can't trust you. It's that simple. You didn't consult me when you had to publish the work I did. I didn't know it was that important. So I got to leave. And that's why I took my master's degree and went to St. Louis where Dave Hogness had hired me as his research assistant in the microbiology department, which was headed by Arthur Kornberg. So that was the path. And then, of course, later Arthur Kornberg got invited by Stanford to come to set up biochemistry at Stanford Medical School here. And the Palmisano family were Italian. Salvador Palmisano was Italian heritage, and his wife Hazel was German Irish. Hazel Haybaker, and their second child was Ruth Palmisano, Verna Ruth Palmisano, who I married as my first wife. It was Ruth and I had 3 kids. The first was born in St. Louis when I was part of the microbiology staff at the Women's Hospital in the Barnes Hospital Center. And then Tony and Mary were born at Stanford Medical School at the hospital. So those are 3 kids. Both Linda and Mary are college graduates and teachers of biological sciences in their high school districts. Linda in Bakersfield and Mary in San Mateo, where currently she's developing a new extension of biological sciences. I came to Stanford in '59 as part of the Kornberg group, and during that time there was an emphasis on the development of healthcare systems, and Stanford faculty, thinking they were elite and above it all, decided to ignore invitations by the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors to participate in a health systems planning commission, which developed the health and hospital systems plan of the county of Santa Clara. And when I learned that no faculty member had been assigned to attend the commission, I began attending each and every meeting as an observer who was not an official member of the group. But since I worked at Stanford and knew what was going on at Stanford, I ended up giving a lot of input that later benefited Stanford. It was not planned, it just happened. But it was the Health and Hospital Systems Plan that was developed by the Santa Clara County Health Systems Development Commission, defined Valley Medical Center as its major public hospital with a series of up to 18 clinics located in the community. A secondary hospital, when needed in the future, would be down in Gilroy. One of the contributions I made to the planning of the system was that there were health planners who wanted to put everything at Bascom and Moore Park in San Jose. And as someone who, as an 18-year-old soldier, walked through Hiroshima, I saw that the survivors of the Hiroshima atomic bomb attack had no medical systems to service their needs, simply because the bomb exploded within a quarter mile of their main offices, and in a flash, their equipment, the building, the staff, and the knowledge that they needed for delivering health care in the Hiroshima area just vanished. And so I argued about decentralizing the medical system healthcare system of the county of Santa Clara. So that and I remind people that we were in a Cold War. There were about 50,000 intercontinental ballistic missiles in China and Russia and a few other places. We had our share. And the Lockheed Marietta Silicon Valley area was a prime target. And therefore, it would be a mistake to have Valley Medical Center as the center of all county health care at Bascom and Moore Park. But it would be logical to have sub-centers in Milpitas, in Gilroy, and in Campbell. And that's what happened. That's the way it is now. Well, I was at Stanford and realized that the Stanford dean's office had decided not to send any representatives to the Santa Clara County healthcare systems planning effort. I went as an observer, and part of my volunteer efforts at that time was working with the Guadalupe Health Center up in Daly City and with the Latino group in Redwood City. And then I got down to El Viso. And El Viso, what happened when I was with the Redwood City is a Latina activist by the name of what was her name? Anyway, her son still talks to me. Submitted my name without discussing to be a member of the commission in San Mateo County, and I got a nice letter saying that they couldn't appoint me because I was a member and a resident of Santa Clara County, and residency was a requirement. That is what caused me to turn my head south towards San Jose and stop dropping my activities in San Mateo County. So I was active with the El Viso Family Health Foundation, which today has morphed into being a huge medical service clinics for the low income people, headed by Raimundo Espinosa, who, interestingly enough, was a person I mentored when he studied his public health degree. I was his mentor and advisor. And we still talk to each other. Gardner Health Clinic is the organization that he has, and it's now about a $50 or $60 million operation that takes care of low-income people wherever in the county of Santa Clara, and does it as a private rather than a county group. Because when I was advising the supervisors and others at Valley Medical Center, I was against developing a larger county hierarchy for one simple reason. The personnel policies and procedures of the county of Santa Clara are so rigid that if somebody really messed up, you could not fire them. You could not reassign them. You could not even counsel them. It had to go through this torturous process, and by the time you got to what you needed to do, it would be 6 or 7 months later, and what you needed to do became irrelevant. So based on that, I wanted nonprofit private sector to do the civic work under contract, because therefore, if they didn't perform at the level required with the expertise required, you could just not agree to fund them the next year. So the county accepted that system, and one of my the people that I talked to a lot and was Dominic Cortese, who is a retired supervisor and eventually became a California senator. He's the father of today's David Cortese, who's running for state senator. So the idea that I had about healthcare was that, and it was the following. With advances in medical science and technology, it was possible for physicians and other allied health personnel to keep patients ambulatory. Therefore, the emphasis on building hospitals and expanding the bed count in a jurisdiction like that of Valley Medical Center, who wanted to have 1,800 beds, and today has only 600, were not appropriate. What was appropriate is the construction of primary care clinics in the community, dispersed throughout the community, so that if there was ever a nuclear war, some of them would survive intact with instrumentation and personnel to deliver health care to the survivors of that encounter. And hopefully that will never happen, but you need to be prepared for it to happen. And in some way or other, it's going to happen, as it is today in New York, except without an atomic bomb, with the coronavirus episode that we're witnessing. So you need to develop the intellectual information, the instrumentation, and disperse it broadly throughout the area rather than concentrate it. My arguments for disbursement, when I went into the various Latino groups or talked to Latino leaders like Sofia Mendoza and Ernestina Garcia. Ernestina Garcia was the first. In fact, she challenged me when I first met her personally. Her question to me is, why do you work at Valley Medical Center with all your knowledge about medical care when we need you here on the East Side? You should be working here. Why are you there? And I told her, you need to understand something. The Latino community does not have the intellectually trained personnel who could support the healthcare system today. And to develop it would take about 15 years. And it would take the support with money and focused effort of the Board of Supervisors of the state of California and a lot of organizations. But more important, you need to deal with the private sector who wants healthcare to remain a private issue so that they can continue to make money. The solution to all this is that we need a two-tier health system where the ordinary tier is what takes care of the shots kids need for school, the child disease, the appendectomies, the broken legs and arms. And those should be covered by universal health insurance. If you need special insurance for a higher level of care, for facial uplifts, cosmetic surgery, or whatever, tummy tucks, whatever, that should be available at added cost under private insurance, and that's where the paid private healthcare insurance sector should be guided towards. But my belief, and I would argue that all of humanity, every member of humanity needs basic medical care, and that should be available without reference to are you insured, without checking his wallet or his social status. The closer you get to that, the better your community will do. And you need to keep one thing in mind. A high level of commercial and scientific output is dependent on a healthy workforce who is trained. And if they don't exist, that can't exist. When people ask me what are you most proud of, I really am not proud of anything. But I have a great deal of satisfaction knowing that I planted certain approaches and ideas, and once those reached the people who allocated resources and personnel and approved programs, such as the Board of Supervisors, certain city councils, or certain civic groups like the Family Health Foundation of Alviso, which is now the Gardner Clinic, that's where they took off. And that was the appropriate takeoff. You cannot have a top-down kind of healthcare system. Healthcare has to begin at the base of the pyramid of need. And if you study Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you'll understand what I'm saying. There's certain basic needs, and some of them are not, quote, healthcare. They're human needs: housing, food, shelter, education, transportation. Those are basic human needs if that individual is going to develop their potential to the highest level possible. In the Latino community, there are so many who are impoverished, who never get outside of their community and therefore do not see things that they have a natural talent for and never get to develop their capacity in that field. And that's true, not as true for those families which have adequate resources to go on field trips or have the kind of relationship with a professional who would take a kid along to see what the job was all about and get exposed to the nuances of certain kinds of work. Because most work is not impossible to learn to do. Well, usually when that kind of attitude exists, that individual's mind has never been exposed to the information that leads to a path that gets there. And there's a path, all kinds of paths. You got to find the one you like for yourself. The many barriers that I supposedly overcame, some real and some imagined. My experience was that my parents kept saying to me a very simple thing. You have the ability and the capacity to do anything you want. And there are those who would say, no te van a dejar, they're not going to let you. And just ignore them. Because they are insecure people who are trying to retain whatever dominion they have on whatever power or influence or area or universe they are familiar with. And they don't realize that your presence expands that universe that they're trying to protect. Because you have a different perspective and represent a different socioeconomic group, a different cultural group, a different ethnic group. And there's so much bias, bigotry, and prejudice. And the one that's never mentioned is the word protectionism. There's so much protection of my turf that the natural development of a lot of issues which could be developed doesn't happen. And they're thought of as discoveries as when they finally get revealed and explained so that common folks understand what they're doing or what's happening. And anybody can be part of that process because we all see the world through the prism of our individual lenses. We all have different perspectives and different insights. And so the main issue is being able to communicate those insights and perspectives and do it to a receptive mind that would integrate that with knowing what you know and sharing what they know. Because the two of you, or the several of you, will resolve things where none of you as individuals will do anything about it. Okay. When I decided to do community work as a clinical chemist at the Family Health Foundation of El Viso, I became acquainted with Roy Jimenez, who was then the director of the Family Health Foundation Clinic in El Viso. And he was into financial management more than, and I was into the high tech, the biological technology, and but still knew enough about the financial management needed, or the financial resources needed. So we became and remained friends until his death. And the citizens of the El Viso community clinic kept saying, "This is our clinic. We wanted to stay here. We wanted to grow. We wanted to do all these things." And unfortunately, I was so innocent in those days that I kept saying to them, "That's not going to happen because you're not big enough. You don't have the resources to support a clinic operation like the Palo Alto Medical Foundation clinic system or the Stanford University Medical Center clinic system. What you need most is a primary care system, which this is a piece of it. So you need to become part of a bigger piece. And I suggest you throw your lot in with Valley Medical Center, because that's where most of you go anyway." And several of the families saw logic to that and went along with me. A few did not. And I was always surprised because recently one of the leaders of the area died, and he was the one that didn't accept my thesis. But I realized once I went to his funeral, I can't think of his name now, he really picked up on some of the thrusts of what I said, but did it his way, and that's okay. I don't think communities understand that they have a lot of power. And the most basic power they have, I think Cesar Chavez understood what it was that in the aggregate, you can have negotiations for a group rather than an individual. Also, in the aggregate, you can assemble votes and move the public structure of a community. So Latinos have got to start learning how to be less individually independent, although they should retain a large portion of that, but be willing to couple with others, learn who is a colleague or a collaborator or a cooperator. And there are all kinds of issues, like street payments, sidewalk payments, schools. Like it wasn't until I pointed out that one of the school districts had a annual budget of $5,600 per student, in contrast to the Palo Alto school system, which had $12,600 for each student. And there was no way in hell the teachers of the school district that got $5,000 could do the same as those who got $12,000, because money is the license to perform, produce, and consume. And if you have that money, you can do that. And everything you do in an organization can be categorized into performance, consumption, or production. and that's just the way it is. So there are even those who disagree with you will agree with you when you put things that they argue about into terms of production or consumption or performance, and they're interested in that. Everybody is, and that allows you to form cooperative, collaborative connections. My first wife, Verna Ruth Palmisano, was the second child of the Palmisano family, and they really expected a boy, so they really wanted Verna Ruth to be a boy. And after 22 years of marriage, during which we had Linda, Mary, and Tony, Ruth ran into a lesbian lady who convinced her that she was really a lesbian. And she asked me to divorce her and move out of the house. And my response after we discussed what was going on was, no, I should stay and become one of the few male heads of household with 3 teenagers. And you can go try being a lesbian. Because if I leave and you're here with the kids, you don't have the freedom of being a lesbian because you're still a mother in charge, primary charge of 3 kids. So we got divorced, and I ended up in custody of the 3 kids. And I was making enough money so that I could encourage Ruth to live within a half mile so the kids could go visit her anytime they wanted to. So the kids retained their mother-child relationship towards the end, and unfortunately she died of a massive cerebral hemorrhage. And after that, I met Betty when I returned from East Africa, and was taken on by the medical center to help with the first Stanford University Hospital expansion project as a representative of the medical school and the faculty senate, medical faculty needs, and conveying those faithfully to the architects and engineers, which is what I did and that started in '67. And since I practice absolute honesty and integrity in those sorts of things, there was no question about trusting me. If I was assigned to get something done or to convey something to another group, it happened properly and correctly. And occasionally I was able, with the input of architects, engineers, and others, forward-thinking people, to improve the idea or put in features that allowed for the improvement and expansion. I had just come back from an assignment, and Dr. Crowley assigned me to represent the medical school interests and the medical faculty interests in the first hospital expansion project. And I attended this planning meeting where I sat at the end of the table as far away from the entryway as I could because I wanted to see everybody that was there. And since I was a new kid on the block, I wanted to find out who was who. And the meeting started, and shortly after the meeting started, this nurse came in all dressed in white with her nurse's hat on. And she was introduced as Miss Rose, and she represented the planning interests of the nursing department. And she pulled out this sheet of paper and said, I've been thinking about our planning, and this is what the first hospital expansion project should look like. And she had a very, very good plan. And when she got through, I said, Miss Rose, would you accept a comment? And she looked surprised. And someone else, whoever was chairing the city, said, tell us what you're thinking about. I said, you planned the North ICU, and what you don't, let me rephrase that. What you need is a X-ray viewing room, because your unit has none. But you were foresighted in producing a couple of sleeping rooms for residents who need to be there in case they were needed immediately by the urgent needs of a patient. And she was really shocked. I said, now let me solve this issue for you. I think those sleeping rooms during the day should have no one sleeping in them, so why not put, instead of paintings, put X-ray viewing boxes. This was in the era before the computers where you could transmit X-rays onto a computer screen. And that solved the problem. But she went off to her nursing head and said, who is that guy? I can't work with him. And I don't want him on that, how do we get him off that group? And she got told, well, he represents Dean Lawrence Crowley, and he will be representing the medical school and the medical faculty needs. And I think you need to get acquainted with him. So after a few months of attending meetings, the other person of interest was a retired gentleman, Emil Strum, who was a state of California expert on codes, medical facility codes. And I got to be friends with him, and one day it was Emil who said, Hilbert, Betty, you and I should go to Stroh's on Friday about 5 o'clock and have a drink, because she needs to know who you are, what your experience is, and be able to work with you. And that's how I met her.
What did she have to drink, and what did you have to drink?
She liked vodka martinis, and I liked vodka tonics, which is, in any case, the three of us ended up being put in the same office suite and doing a lot of planning for Stanford University Hospital, where I represented the medical school and the medical faculty's interests, which led to the first hospital expansion project at Stanford Hospital and set the base for the second. And that's when Valley Medical Center, Dr. Yvonne Russell sent someone to ask me to go down there and help them with theirs.